I didn't ask to know, but she had no choice but to tell me. Maybe that's what stings the most, knowing she confessed because she had to, not because she wanted to. When Sarah sat me down at the kitchen table, I thought we were going to argue about something small, forgotten chores, kids misbehaving. You know, the usual. But the look in her eyes that night, I'd never seen it before. Something was off, and my gut was already telling me to brace for impact. "I've been seeing someone else," she whispered. In that moment, my world shifted, and everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, came crashing down. It was late in the evening when I got home from work. The air outside had a crispness to it, winter creeping in, and inside the house, there was an odd stillness. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded together, her eyes downcast. Something about the way she looked, almost small, like she was shrinking into herself, stopped me in my tracks. I hung my coat by the door and made my way over to her. I'd been with Sarah for 10 years, long enough to know her tells, her shifts in mood. There were nights when we sat and talked about the kids or work or nothing at all. But this wasn't one of those nights. There was a weight in the air I couldn't quite name. "I think we need to talk," she said quietly, not meeting my gaze. The moment those words left her mouth, my stomach dropped. It's funny how just a few words can make everything before them seem irrelevant. I slid into the chair across from her, my heart picking up pace without knowing why. There was a part of me that already knew what was coming, and another part that refused to believe it. She looked up finally, and the sadness in her eyes was something I hadn't seen before. "Mike, I've been keeping something from you," she started, her voice trembling just a bit. "I need to tell you now. I don't have a choice anymore." Her words were like a slow drip, each one filling me with more dread. I didn't say anything, just waited for her to continue. I could feel my hands clenching under the table, the fear coiling in my chest, though I couldn't yet explain why. I've been seeing someone else," she said, almost in a whisper. Time stopped. For a second, I thought I hadn't heard her right. Then the words sank in, burning like acid. "Seeing someone else?" I repeated, my voice hoarse, as if the words struggled to form. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's not. I didn't want to hurt you, Mike. I swear. But I met him a few months ago, and it just happened. I didn't mean for it to. I swear I didn't." For a few long moments, I just sat there, staring at her. My mind raced, trying to grasp onto anything to steady myself, but everything slipped through my fingers. This was my wife, the mother of my children, the woman I'd built my life around. And now this? Who is he? I asked, my voice low and controlled. It was the only question I could manage to ask, though I wasn't even sure why it mattered. She looked down again, her hands trembling in her lap. It's someone from work. His name is Tom. Tom. The name meant nothing to me, but suddenly it meant everything. I clenched my fists, feeling the surge of anger rising, but I pushed it down. "And how long?" I asked, the words coming out slow, deliberate, because I needed to know. I needed to understand how long I'd been the fool. "For months," she said, barely audible. "4 months, Mike. But it's over now. I ended it. I had to tell you because I couldn't live with the guilt anymore." Guilt. Now she feels guilt. After 4 months of lying, after nights spent with this man, she was suddenly struck by guilt? I don't understand, Sarah. How the hell does this happen? For months? We have 2 kids. We've been together for 10 years. And I trailed off, not knowing how to finish that sentence. "How could you do this to us?" Tears were spilling down her cheeks now, and she shook her head as if she didn't know the answer herself. "I wasn't trying to destroy us. I swear I wasn't. But I felt lost for a long time. And then Tom came along, and I don't know, he made me feel seen. Seen. That word hit like a punch to the gut. As if I hadn't seen her for 10 years. As if everything I'd ever done was somehow invisible. I didn't know what to say next. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to shout and hurl every accusation I could think of. But another part, the part that had loved her for 10 years, just felt numb. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" I finally asked, leaning back in my chair. "If you hadn't felt guilty, would you still be seeing him?" She bit her lip, and that hesitation was all I needed. I knew the answer even before she said it. "I don't know," she admitted softly, the words tearing a hole in my chest. "I don't know, Mike." I ended it because I couldn't stand the lies anymore. "But I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found out." I stood up abruptly, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape. The anger was rising again, and I didn't trust myself to stay calm. I needed space. Air. I need to get out of here for a bit, I said, grabbing my jacket from the hook by the door. I can't think straight right now. Mike, wait, she started, but I was already halfway out the door. I didn't wait for her to finish. I didn't want to hear any more. Not then. I got into my car and drove, not really caring where I went. Just away. Away from the house. Away from her. Away from the life that had suddenly become unrecognizable. I found myself parked in front of the local bar, the one I hadn't been to in months. Not since the kids were little. I walked inside, ordered a drink, and just sat there, staring at the amber liquid in the glass, trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. She'd been with another man. For months. I kept repeating it to myself, as if that would help make it real, but it still didn't feel real. It felt like some sick dream I hadn't woken up from yet. An hour or so later, I found myself back in the car, driving home. I didn't feel any better. If anything, I felt worse. The shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, festering anger. When I walked back into the house, Sarah was still sitting at the table, her face pale, eyes red from crying. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked, not even bothering to sit down this time. I couldn't afford to dance around it anymore. I needed to know everything. She nodded, and it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. "Yes," she whispered. "I did." The finality of it hit me like a hammer. The betrayal, the lies. I could have dealt with a lot of things, but this was the one thing that felt unforgivable. Her voice, that small, broken whisper of yes, echoed in my head, louder than any shout could have been. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to comprehend the weight of that one word. Everything inside me wanted to explode, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself nodding slowly, like I was accepting a verdict I'd known was coming all along. It felt like the end of something sacred, something I hadn't even realized was fragile until it shattered right in front of me. "Why, Sarah?" I finally asked, my voice calm, too calm for what I was feeling inside. Why did you feel the need to?" I couldn't even finish the sentence. I didn't want the details, not really. I just needed some answer that would make sense, that would make it easier to process. But there was no easy answer for something like this. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice shaky when she spoke. "I don't know. It wasn't planned. It started out as just talking, you know? I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. Those 3 words. It just happened. How many marriages have been destroyed by those words? How many lives have been upended because people just let things happen?" It felt like the weakest excuse, a way to avoid responsibility. And here she was, the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, saying it to me. "But you kept doing it," I said. And this time I could hear the anger seeping into my voice, my hands curling into fists at my sides. "For 4 months, Sarah. You lied to me, to our kids, to everyone. How could you?" She looked down, silent, her shoulders shaking as more tears fell. And for a moment, I just stood there, watching her, feeling the weight of all those unsaid words between us. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness. It all sat heavy in the room, suffocating any hope of salvaging what we once had. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry, Mike. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you. I never stopped loving you." It was hard to believe her. How could she love me and betray me like this at the same time? Love wasn't supposed to work that way. Love wasn't supposed to tear you apart, piece by piece. I let out a harsh laugh, shaking my head. "You call this love, Sarah? Because I don't know what the hell this is. Love isn't sneaking around with someone else for months. Love isn't lying to my face, to our kids' faces. You didn't love me. You just didn't want to be alone." Her sobs grew louder, but I couldn't stop. I was saying everything that had been building up since she'd first confessed, letting it all out like a dam finally breaking. "What am I supposed to do with this?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "Just forgive you? Pretend like this never happened and go back to the way things were? You've wrecked everything, Sarah." It was quiet after that, so quiet that the silence felt deafening. Sarah didn't respond. She just sat there crying softly, her head in her hands. And for the first time, I realized that we were both mourning something. The life we had built, the trust we had taken for granted, the future we thought we'd have. I wanted to walk away, to leave her sitting there in her guilt and sorrow. But I couldn't move. Not yet. Part of me still wanted to hear something, anything that would make this better, that would give me a reason to fight for us. But there was nothing she could say that would erase the betrayal. Nothing she could do to take back those nights she'd spent with him. I ended it, she said suddenly, her voice trembling. I ended it because I knew I couldn't keep lying to you. I knew it was wrong, Mike. That's why I told you. I couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. You only told me because you couldn't handle your own guilt, not because you cared about what you were doing to me. This wasn't for me, Sarah. It was for you. She shook her head, her eyes desperate now. That's not true. I wanted to fix things. I still do. I want us to get through this, Mike. I need us to get through this. I looked away, staring at the photos on the wall. Pictures of us from vacations, holidays, birthday parties. We looked so happy in those photos, so content. And maybe we had been once, but now, all I could see were the cracks in the facade, the lies hidden behind those smiles. Do the kids know? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, I didn't want them to know. They're going to find out, I said, the weight of that truth hitting me hard. Whether you tell them or not, they're going to find out. And when they do, they'll never look at you the same way again. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, running through every moment of our marriage, trying to figure out where it had gone wrong. Was there something I could have done to prevent this? Had I missed the signs? Was I too wrapped up in work, in the daily grind, to see my wife slipping away? When the morning light filtered through the window, I knew one thing for sure. Nothing was going to be the same. This wasn't something we could fix overnight. Hell, I wasn't even sure it was something we could fix at all. I got dressed quietly, trying not to wake the kids. Sarah was still in bed when I went downstairs, her side of the bed rumpled but empty. The house felt cold, lifeless. I made a pot of coffee, staring out the window at the backyard where the kids used to play. Now everything just seemed hollow. When Sarah came down a little while later, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept either. She stood in the doorway, watching me pour a cup of coffee, as if she was afraid to speak. Are we going to talk about this? She asked softly, her voice barely audible. I didn't look at her. What's left to talk about? We need to figure out what we're going to do, she said, her voice breaking. For the kids, for us, we can't just ignore this, Mike. I finally turned to face her. My jaw clenched. You want to talk about what to do now? After everything? Fine. But you need to understand something, Sarah. This isn't just about what you want anymore. You don't get to control this. The next few days were a blur of tension and awkward silence. We tiptoed around each other, careful not to let the kids see the cracks that had split open between us. They were young enough to sense that something was off, but too young to understand exactly what. I spent most of my time at work or out of the house, avoiding the situation. But every time I came home, the weight of what had happened was still there, pressing down on me. I could see it in Sarah's eyes, in the way she moved around the house like she didn't belong there anymore. We hadn't told the kids yet. I wasn't sure how to even start that conversation. How do you tell your children that their mother cheated, that their family is on the verge of falling apart? There was no easy way to break that kind of news, no way to soften the blow. A week passed, each day dragging slower than the last. Sarah and I were living like strangers under the same roof, exchanging polite words only when absolutely necessary. The kids had noticed, of course. You can't hide tension like that forever. Bryce, our oldest, had started asking questions. Nothing direct, just careful probing. Tessa, always the more intuitive one, watched us with eyes that knew too much for a child her age. I knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Part of me thought about sitting down with them and just ripping the bandage off. But the coward in me, the part that didn't want to see their faces when I told them what their mother had done, kept pushing it off. One evening, I came home late from work, exhausted after a long day. The house was quiet, too quiet, and when I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The kids' backpacks were still by the door, shoes scattered on the floor, but there was no sign of them. I found Sarah in the living room, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, staring at the wall. "They're with my mom," she said before I could ask. Her voice was flat, like she was barely holding it together. "I thought we could talk, just the two of us." I sighed, setting my keys down on the table. I wasn't ready for another conversation, not after the week we'd had, but I knew this was coming. There was no more avoiding it. I walked over and sat down across from her, the space between us feeling like an uncrossable chasm. "We can't keep living like this, Mike," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. But we need to figure out what we're going to do. For the kids. For us." I leaned forward, rubbing my hands over my face. "You keep saying that, Sarah. But what do you expect me to say? You want me to just forget that you cheated? Pretend like this didn't happen?" "No," she said quickly, her eyes wide with desperation. "I know you can't just forget, but I don't want to throw everything away. We've been together for so long. We can't just let it end like this." I shook my head, feeling the familiar anger rise in my chest. "You're the one who let it end, Sarah. You made that decision when you decided to sleep with him." "I told you it's over," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I ended it, Mike. I made a mistake, but I'm trying to fix it." "You didn't make a mistake," I said, my voice sharp. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. You made a choice. You made the choice to betray me, to betray our family. And now you want to act like it's something we can just patch up with a conversation." She started to cry again, but this time it didn't soften me. I'd seen too many tears in the past week, heard too many apologies. They didn't mean anything anymore. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" I asked, feeling the exhaustion in my bones. "You want me to forgive you? Is that it? You want us to go back to the way things were?" She wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. "I just want you to try. I want us to try." I stood up, pacing the room, trying to think through the haze of anger and grief that clouded my mind. Try. The word felt so small, so inadequate for what she was asking. Later that night, after the conversation had exhausted both of us, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Sarah asleep beside me. I hadn't slept in our bed since she told me about the affair, but I hadn't wanted the kids to come home and see their parents sleeping apart. I had enough to explain to them as it was. Her words echoed in my mind. "I want you to try." What did trying even mean? Did it mean swallowing my pride, my hurt, and pretending like we could rebuild from this? Did it mean couples therapy, sitting in some stranger's office talking about our feelings while they scribbled notes on a clipboard? Or did trying mean something else entirely? Did it mean accepting that things were broken beyond repair and finding a way to move on? I didn't have the answers. And every time I thought I did, my mind would wander back to her with him, back to the betrayal that had gutted me. At some point in the early hours of the morning, I got out of bed and went downstairs, sitting on the couch in the dark. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I felt like something needed to break, like a dam inside me that was holding back too much emotion. I just didn't know when or how it would happen. The next morning, Sarah and I sat down with the kids. It was time. We couldn't delay it any longer. Not when the tension in the house was so thick that they were starting to ask questions. Bryce and Tessa sat across from us, wide-eyed and worried. They could tell something was wrong. Kids always can. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I stopped her. This was my job, my responsibility. I couldn't let her tell them. "Not this. Your mom and I need to talk to you." I began, keeping my voice steady. "Things have been hard lately, and we want to be honest with you about what's going on." Bryce shifted in his seat, looking between us with that teenage suspicion, always expecting the worst. "You guys are getting a divorce, aren't you?" he asked, his voice flat, like he'd already accepted it. Tessa gasped, looking at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "No, Daddy, you're not, right? You're not leaving, right?" I swallowed hard, glancing at Sarah, who was wiping her tears with a tissue. This was it, the moment I had dreaded, the one that was going to change everything for our kids, for us. "We don't know what's going to happen yet," I said carefully, trying to ease their panic. "But things are going to be different for a while. We're trying to figure it out. But we want you to know that no matter what, we both love you. That's not going to change." Tessa was crying now, and Bryce was glaring at the floor, refusing to look at either of us. "Why?" he asked, his voice quiet but full of anger. "Why are things different?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but I cut in. "Because sometimes things don't go the way you plan," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we're going to do everything we can to make sure you two are okay." The truth hung there, unspoken, lingering in the air between us. They didn't need to know the details, not yet. But they knew enough. They knew things weren't going to be the same, and in their eyes, that was already a betrayal. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself back on the couch, staring at the family photos that lined the walls. They were snapshots of a life, I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. Sarah had gone upstairs, giving me space, but it didn't feel like enough. We were living on borrowed time. I knew that. Maybe she knew it too. As I sat there in the quiet of the house, I realized that I had a choice to make. I could either fight for something that might already be lost or let go of the life we'd built and figure out how to move on. Neither option felt good. Both felt like a kind of death. But one way or another, something had to give. And for the first time since she told me the truth, I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to save us. By the time a few more weeks had passed, the tension in the house was unbearable. It wasn't just Sarah and me anymore. It was the kids, too. Tessa had become quiet, keeping to herself more than usual, while Bryce was angry at the world. The impact of Sarah's betrayal had spread like a wildfire, burning through all of us. One night, after another awkward family dinner, I sat down by myself in the living room. The house was quiet, but my mind was anything but. I couldn't stop replaying everything. Her confession, the endless nights of silence, and my own struggle with what to do next. I'd been so focused on the pain, the anger, the betrayal, that I hadn't even considered what I needed. It was always about the kids, or about Sarah's remorse, or about keeping up appearances. But in the end, I had to face the truth. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel safe. And as much as I hated admitting it, I didn't think I could ever fully trust her again. And that's when I realized something important. Sometimes, love isn't enough. There was a time when I believed love could fix anything, but this was different. This wasn't just a bump in the road. It was a wreck that had left me shattered, and no amount of apologies or promises could undo the damage. I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and found Sarah cleaning up. She looked tired, the weight of everything finally showing in her posture. She must have sensed what I was about to say, because she put down the dish she was holding and turned to face me, her eyes wide with expectation. "We need to talk," I said, echoing the words she'd said to me weeks ago. She nodded slowly, bracing herself. "I don't think we can fix this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. The words hung between us like a heavy fog. Sarah's face crumpled, her lip trembling as she struggled to hold back tears. "I'm so sorry, Mike," she whispered. I thought we could work through this." "I know you're sorry," I said, my heart breaking a little as I saw her pain. "But it's not enough. I don't think I can trust you again. And without trust, we have nothing." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a strange kind of peace settle over me. It wasn't that I wanted to hurt her, but I knew that staying in this marriage, pretending like we could somehow repair it, was only going to make things worse for both of us. And for the kids, I need space. I continued, my voice trembling. I need to figure out what my life looks like without this constant pain. I don't know what the future holds for us, but right now, I need to step away. Sarah nodded, wiping her tears away, and whispered, "I understand." It didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took months for me to fully accept that the life I had planned with Sarah was gone. But slowly, I began to rebuild. First by moving into a small apartment, then by reconnecting with old friends I hadn't seen in years, people who had always been there, but I'd lost touch with. The kids split their time between us, and that was the hardest part. But I knew staying in a toxic environment would have been worse for them than seeing their parents live apart. Sarah and I kept things civil for their sake, but it was clear our time as husband and wife was over. I'm not going to lie, there were moments when I questioned everything. When I thought maybe I should have tried harder to forgive her. Maybe I should have given her another chance. But then I remembered the sleepless nights, the gut-wrenching feeling of betrayal, and I knew that no amount of effort could erase that. If you're reading this and you've been in a similar situation, I won't pretend to have all the answers. But here's what I've learned through my own experience. 1. Betrayal changes everything. Once trust is broken, it's nearly impossible to go back to the way things were. You can try, but it'll never feel the same. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes letting go is the best choice you can make for yourself. 2. It's okay to prioritize your own healing. In the midst of everything, I spent so much time trying to protect the kids, trying to understand Sarah's perspective, that I forgot to ask myself what I needed. Don't lose yourself in the process of trying to hold everything together. 3. Forgiveness is personal. Forgiving someone doesn't always mean staying with them. You can forgive and still walk away. I had to come to terms with the fact that I wasn't obligated to fix things just because I still cared about Sarah on some level. 4. The kids will be okay. I worried about how the divorce would affect them, but kids are resilient. They adapt. What matters most is that they see you taking care of yourself, that they know they're loved by both parents, even if things look different now. Divorce doesn't mean failure. That was one of the hardest lessons for me to accept. I'd always seen it as the ultimate defeat, the sign that you didn't try hard enough. But that's not true. Sometimes, ending a marriage is the healthiest thing you can do for yourself and your family. If you're in a similar situation, struggling with the betrayal of a partner, or facing the aftermath of an affair, know this. You deserve to be in a relationship where trust isn't something you have to question. You deserve peace. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to walk away. It won't be easy. It won't be quick, but it will be worth it in the end. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.